All right. So welcome everybody. My name's Eric Owens. I'm director of the International Studies program, and every year it's such a treat to have our alumni come back and join us to share their experiences launching from Boston College into the various, workplaces and around the world and in different cities that they go into. And as you all know, one of our core sort of tracks for our students is through law school. And so many students consider what the law can mean to them professionally, personally, morally as well, the kind of work that you can do there. And so it's a special privilege to have some of our illustrious alums here talking about their journey through law school. Thank you all for being here, Antonio, Shayna, Angela, and thank you, Ben and Delphine, for putting this together. I'm going to hand this over to you guys to lead introductions and the conversation afterwards. But just thank you again. We really appreciate it. And for those who are just joining us, we will be recording this and posting it on our YouTube channel as well, along with other career conversations. So thank you all. Look forward to the talk.
Hi, everyone. Very nice to meet you all. Thank you all for being here today, to our participants, especially to our panelists for taking the time out of your day. I'm a peer advisor with the International Studies program. My name is Delphine Gareau, and I'll be co-hosting this event with Ben, and I'll hand it over to you, Ben.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ben. I'm also a peer advisor. I'm a senior here at BC. We're so lucky to have an incredible lineup of legal professionals and soon-to-be legal professionals here, and also amazing IS alumni, Antonio Mata, Shayna Scott, and Anxhela Miles. Each of them is at a different stage in their legal career, and they'll be sharing insights about their journey from BC to law school and beyond. So I think to start, we'll start off with brief introductions. So if the panelists could share a little bit about themselves, tell us about your current role, where you are in your legal career, and some educational background. And we'll start with Angela, please.
Yeah, thank you for having me and happy to kick things off. My name's Anxhela Miles. I'm a staff attorney at Conservation Law Foundation. I've been there for it'll be 3 years actually, and officially 2 weeks, which is always an exciting point in the legal journey. But I work in the Clean Energy and Climate Change program and the Environmental Justice program. And it's been a pleasure really to make sure that Massachusetts is meeting its climate goals while also just working with key populations throughout the state. A bit of background for me and how I got to where I am. I was born in Albania, but moved to the States when I was 2. And then I actually learned about climate change issues through a song in middle school. Music's always been a really big part of my life, and very funny that this is kind of what got me started on this track. But learned about climate change from that issue and got really fascinated with the international perspective on it and just climate negotiation work. And then, did kind of like Earth Day Fair stuff when I was in high school, and then ultimately landed at BC and came across Noah Snyder's office, who runs the environmental science department at BC. And he recommended that I kind of take up some of the science work at BC to learn about the climate science behind climate change. And then in the midst of that, I also learned about the International Studies program. I think we were the first or second year to get started on it, if I'm not mistaken, but I think it was pretty early on. And I was really excited that BC was doing it because I always wanted to kind of find a way to combine my passions on climate change issues with the international perspective. And the International Studies Department really allowed me to do so, helped me write a thesis on the topic, and, took a lot of international law classes on kind of the environmental aspects of these issues. And then ultimately decided to go to law school. Like many of you, I was debating which path to go down, whether it was a master's of public policy or a legal degree. But it felt like the legal degree would open up multiple avenues for me to either pursue policy legislative work, to actually, take on some of these cases, and also to do research. I really liked writing and doing research. And I went to school at Pace Law School in White Plains, which it's a top environmental law program now. And at Pace, I also kind of found a way to do the both international and environmental law, got both certificates, had some exciting internships at the UN, and then wrote my thesis on a topic pertaining in the International Court of Justice. I did graduate during COVID, which you can imagine is one, not an easy time to be graduating to, particularly with a legal degree, but eventually found my way working on the issues that I'm passionate about. I took a job at a firm for a year and then made my way to CLF. And we do a lot of regional work. So any international work that I'm getting involved with is on a research basis and pertains to my writing. But I think the door is still open for me in many ways. And it's still something that I'm passionate about and that I'm always seeking opportunities to get involved. So I hope that's a summary. I tried to be as quick as possible, but I'll pass it to the next person.
Perfect. Thank you. Shayna, would you go next, please? Thank you.
Sure. My name is Shayna Scott. I am a 2014 BC grad from the International Studies program, and I'm now a staff attorney at the Legal Aid Society. I work on a program called the New York Immigrant Family Unity Project, or NYFUP is the acronym, where we represent New Jersey residents who are in immigration removal proceedings at all the stages of their proceedings, so trial level and appeals. I have been here for a couple months, but I have been doing this work, immigration defense, and have been in the legal field for 3 years. I graduated law school in 2022, also at the end of COVID. Coming out of BC, I knew I was interested in immigration advocacy. I've been really involved in both volunteer and coursework at BC related to those issues through the For Boston Volunteer Corps, through ELL classes that BC students would hold with dining staff, and through a number of my courses. I really loved that the International Studies program was so broadly interdisciplinary, so I could take history courses on immigration law, I could take political science courses, I could take really anything that touched on the issues I cared about. Coming out of BC, I was not sure I wanted to go to law school. And so I spent some time working to really figure out what was the right path for me. So I worked pretty short term as a business immigration paralegal at a large firm that represented employers who were hiring immigrant employees. That wasn't the best fit for me. So then I moved on to nonprofits, where I worked at a nonprofit in New York focused on access to counsel for immigrants in removal proceedings. And there I was working at much more of a policy and programmatic level. But if you spend enough years saying access to counsel is critical, access to counsel expands outcomes and improves outcomes for real people, after a while you start thinking maybe I should be the counsel. So I ultimately went to law school, finished 3 years ago, and I was working at Rutgers Law School in their immigrant rights clinic for the first 2 years when I got out of law school. But it's been a great experience at the Legal Aid Society. I'm happy to talk about any of these experiences I've touched on, and excited to hear your questions today. Thanks.
Thank you. Antonio?
Hi, everyone. My name is Antonio Mata. I graduated from BC in 2023. And at BC, I majored in international studies, of course, and political science. And I am currently a second-year law student at GW Law School in Washington, D.C. And I would say that throughout, my college career, I really explored different aspects, not of the law, but of things that would like maybe manifest in an attorney role, depending on what type of practice I wanted to pursue. So through taking international studies courses, I was introduced to like human rights law, for example, by taking Professor Owens's class. I actually wrote a paper on human rights law. And it's something that I've already, explored through coursework at GW Law. So I did that at BC, but then I also, for example, wrote for Gusto Journal, which is a food journal at BC. And even though that might seem like completely like unrelated to the legal profession, I grew to really appreciate like the ability to creatively express yourself through writing. And one avenue through which you can kind of like tap into that is through intellectual property law, where you protect people's creative ideas and their rights in that sense. So that's another thing that I've explored through law school by taking copyright law right now. But overall, I always really did want to be an attorney, pretty much since I was about 14 years old. I loved the idea of being an advocate for others and empowering them in the process, but then also learning from serving others. And at law school, I've been fortunate to also have direct experience in that. And I actually had experience in the immigration field as well. This past summer, I interned for the GW Law Immigration Clinic. And the main thing that I did as an intern at the immigration clinic was work on an asylum case for a client that's been with the clinic for many years at this point. And my main responsibility was to basically put together a pre-trial filing in anticipation of the client's individual calendar hearing, which is arguably like the most important hearing that they have in order to determine whether or not they're granted asylum or not in the United States. And so that taught me so much because in addition to writing a legal brief where I, drew on cases, try to prove that the client would be unsafe if they were to return to their country of origin, I also had to create an affidavit based on interviews that I conducted with the client to again prove how they've established their life in the United States over the years and how again they would be unsafe if they were to return to their country of origin. And so it was through an experience like that that I think that my aspiration to become an attorney was solidified through that experience because even if I don't necessarily want to be a full-time immigration attorney, I think it did teach me that I want to serve others in the legal profession because I think that you can really um, amplify their voices through that and fight for others in a way that um, maybe not maybe is not accessible in other professions. So that's kind of been the trajectory of my career so far. And I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do in the future. Again, I'm still a law student, and I think that this is a period of exploration regarding your interests. But I'm really open to the fields that I come across. So,
Thank you all so much. I'll get us started with a question that I have. You all kind of touched on this a little bit, but maybe if you want to expand a bit more on why you ultimately decided to go into the career of law, why you ultimately decided to take on the commitment of law school. I think a lot of students at this stage of like deciding what they want to do with their career as a junior and senior are not always 100% confident what they want to do post grad. And so how can you expand on that a little bit? How did you ultimately decide um, to go into the career that you did, maybe with somewhat of uncertainty in terms of what you would do with that degree afterwards? Shayna, you spoke a little bit about that. Would you want to expand?
Absolutely. So for me, taking a little time between undergrad and law school was really beneficial. I do have friends that I went to BC with, some even international studies majors who went straight through because they had a lot more certainty about what direction they were going. But for me, I was interested in advocacy broadly for immigrant communities, and I knew that could mean policy work. I knew that could mean government work. I knew that could mean law. And it's a really big investment of time and money to go to law school, especially when you haven't had time to live, work, and save. So for me, the right choice was to spend a little bit of time working in the field. And it did help that a lot of the work that I did, I was on teams with lawyers. So I got very realistic and practical advice when I did start applying to law school, or even before I decided to apply. They asked me some pretty important questions about why I was going and whether I sort of had the right reasons and the motivation to really pursue this for 3 years. So I felt pretty confident by the time I came around to going to law school after having a lot of those conversations. And I do think that the fact that I had immigration experience going into my law school applications did make my applications stronger and also put me in the running for some like scholarships and other opportunities because I could show demonstrated experience and passion for this field. That's not to say you couldn't still qualify those if you came straight out of undergrad, but you would have to have a pretty strong application and dedicated level of interest at that earlier point in your life. So for me, I'm pretty happy with how that worked out. I know at the time that I was considering law school, a lot of lawyers you ask will say, don't do what I did. It's terrible. They'll try to talk you out of it. If you get to the point where you can stand up to those arguments, you're ready.
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in next unless you want to go, Antonio. But yeah, I think similarly, I went straight to law school after undergrad, and I think there's pros and cons to it. Shane, I think you mentioned a great point, taking years off. I think in that situation, it seems like law students do a better job at managing the stress because they've been out there in the real world. They know they want to go to law school. And I think that does help just with stress levels. But, once you're a student and just kind of continue on the student level, you're used to school and to studying. So I think there's advantages to doing it either way. And I think for me, I think I mentioned this, but just it seemed like a legal degree opened up multiple doors, and that could have been practicing law, teaching, writing, and I'm experiencing that now at at the organization. Some of the work that we do is kind of the traditional litigation focused. A lot of it is also policy, legislative work, and then I try to write on the side when I can. So I do like that a legal degree makes you think that way, but I think also a very practical thing to consider is just the finances behind it. If I didn't get a scholarship, I don't think I would have been able to go right away. I think that would have delayed me and might have, brought me down a different path. So I do think you have to consider the commitment that it's going to place on you for the next few years. And I think if there is a topic within the law that you're passionate about, it helps to go to a school that's really focused on that area of law because they might give you more, scholarship opportunities, and that could help you wrap your head around the commitment that it'll be.
So I am going to start with a little bit of a generic answer and then go into more specifics. I think that everyone should do what feels right to them at the time in terms of transitioning into law school. I never had a doubt throughout college that I wanted to be an attorney. There was a period where I was debating, should I work after or should I go straight through? I think that throughout the majority of college, I really wanted to go straight through. But then, you see your peers, your friends who are going to work for a year or two before going to grad school. And you're like, and you ask yourself, like, should I do that? Like, will there be benefits to it? And of course, there will be. And I do agree that there's definitely pros and cons to going straight to law school after graduating. Um, I think that there's absolutely no harm in taking the time to work in something that you're passionate about and kind of like refining that interest and ideally applying that interest and showing a demonstrated experience in that interest in law school, because I think it could definitely look great on a job application, for example, if you want to work at a law firm that touches on that interest. However, I also think that when you're at a point in your senior year where you're deciding whether or not you want to go to law school and you truly have an eagerness to transition into law school afterwards because you want to explore it further. Maybe you did a legal internship during college that really, really ignited your passion for the law and you want to, continue pursuing that through other internships. Then I think that there's also no harm in going directly to law school afterwards. I also think that, based on conversations that I've had with some of my peers who have both went straight through to law school and then also have worked a little bit after, I have heard some individuals who worked a little bit after say that it was hard for them to adjust back to school because they were working for years and they forgot what it was like to keep up with readings and coursework and stuff, and how it was a little bit of an adjustment for them to go back to school, and especially law school, because law school, spoiler alert, it's really difficult. So it's a lot of readings to keep up with. So I could anticipate it being an adjustment when you've worked for a few years. And of course, there's so many stresses with working in and of itself. But law school is definitely a different experience from what I've heard. But at the end of the day, I again think that if you find yourself in your senior year with a really strong inclination to go to law school because you have certain interests in mind and you want to explore that through coursework and also internships, then if it feels right to you, then you should do it, because I think that that is ultimately what happened with me. I was debating on working afterwards or not, but I really reflected on the years that I was in college where I, for example, interned for the Innocence program at BC, and I really loved the work that I did there. And then also interned for the Center for Human Rights at BC, and became acquainted with a lot of like human rights law and international human rights crises. And I think I was just ready to explore those interests in law school. And even though I've definitely encountered some challenges, I don't regret my decision. So all that to say, do what feels right to you at the time.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a helpful discussion to have on the K through JD versus time off. I'm deciding that too, and I'm sure that others in attendance are thinking about that. I want to pivot a little bit to more broad themes. So obviously BC encourages us to be men and women for others, and the IS program urges us to ask about global issues and addressing the difficult questions. And so I'm curious how you, in your work, I mean, it sounds like you guys are doing amazing things, and how you incorporate sort of those motifs and themes from BC of serving others into your work, or how you plan to, and how that's like a guiding um, like compass for you guys. And anyone could take that.
I can start. I can speak to my experience in the immigration clinic, because so far that's the only like legal internship that I've had as a law student so far, and I think it's by far the one that I've had the most responsibility in my entire life. And I think that serving others was a fundamental aspect of that role for many reasons. As I said earlier, an important part of my role was working in an asylum case and crafting a pretrial filing that was submitted to court before the hearing. And it was important to submit that because in that pretrial filing, there were a lot of, well, first of all, I wrote a brief in that pretrial filing that essentially argued why the client was entitled to asylum in the United States. But it also included an affidavit, which I also said earlier, that described the client's life that they've built for themselves in the United States in the years that they've lived in the United States, and then also the reasons why they would be in danger if they return to their country of origin. And it also included reports indicating the dangerous conditions in their country of origin as well. But I think that the process of compiling that pretrial filing and submitting it to court entailed a lot of communication with the client. I had to really keep the client's interests as a priority throughout the entire process, because ultimately I'm serving that human being. I'm serving that human being who feels like their life would be in jeopardy if they return to their country of origin. So you have to keep that in mind throughout the entire process and kind of use it as a guiding force. And in particular, I had to establish a relationship of trust, because a lot of the issues that came up were really sensitive topics. It's a serious situation. And there were reasons why the client left their country of origin and came to the United States that are really difficult to grasp or to deal with as a human being. And so I had to have that sensitivity to that, and then also encourage open communication so that I could help the client in the best way that I could. So that was a foundational aspect, is, having that space for open communication grounded in trust. And so I think that that's how I served others through my role.
I can go. So also in the immigration sphere, since that's where I work, I think part of why I landed on the particular program that I did is because of those very deeply held values about serving others and serving especially those in the most need. So there's many ways to practice immigration law. They are all important and impact clients in meaningful ways. Even when I started as a paralegal in sort of the business space, there are people whose dream and aspiration is to get a visa to come to the United States for work, and that's extremely important and life-changing for them and their families. But the work I do now in Knife Up is really focused on a very vulnerable population. So Knife Up serves New York residents who are detained and in a removal proceeding where ICE is actively trying to remove them from the United States as quickly and expeditiously as they can. And we are often the only force that is an impediment to them doing that, since the vast majority of people are unrepresented in their immigration proceedings because there is no right to counsel in a civil immigration process. So in localities like New York, where they have put money and resources into immigration defense, we are really the force that stands between people and a very quick removal order. And these are the clients who are most targeted whenever there are new enforcement initiatives, and who are already sort of in ICE custody and easy to funnel through the process with limited access to due process or their rights to asylum and otherwise. So I landed in this position because I feel really passionately about access to counsel, access to people's human rights in all contexts. And this is sort of where I saw the most need. It's also known to be a pretty intense, fast moving and kind of high burnout field, but there's many other ways to still do impactful work. Our organization works with a lot of pro bonos that are based in New York City and otherwise, who will take on discrete cases or issues, often asylum claims or other fear-based claims. And those are still extremely important. So even those working in the private sector can really have an enormous impact on individual clients and cases.
Yeah, happy to go next. I think you're clearly seeing that BC's education makes us all reflect on the impact that we'll have on people's lives for years to come. And that's indicative from what the other panelists have stated. Yeah, there's no denying that I think the legal field can put people in unique situations when you're either working for a law firm or the federal government or for a nonprofit. And for me, it's been really nice to be at an NGO because I get to focus on the larger impacts that, at the issues at hand on climate change advocacy and also on the impact that that's having on people's lives. What I've really enjoyed about my work at CLF is that we take a really strong human perspective on these issues. So, for example, Massachusetts just passed, as of last night, a law that is going to help renewable energy facilities get permitted in a quicker manner, but is also providing money for individuals to get a part of that process and to make sure that their voice is heard when those facilities are going to get approved. I've also done direct representation of different environmental justice communities throughout my legal proceedings, which is not something we often do, but is really nice that I've had the opportunity to do that in two instances. One in East Boston, where a substation was going to get built near, the only green space in the area and making an industrial area even more industrial. And also got to ensure that folks in Salem, Massachusetts, benefited from an offshore wind port development. So directly negotiated with them on a community benefits agreement. And the reason why I spoke about kind of the law firm, state agency or federal agency discrepancy is because, as a lawyer, if you're at a firm, you might not always get to pick your clients. You kind of get matters put in front of you. And I think that really makes you reflect on whether or not your cases are aligned with your values. And I think that is a decision that you can really start contemplating at this point now, because if you're going to put on a lot of debt to go to law school, you might feel forced to work at a law firm later on, and that might put you in a particular situation. I think there's great work that firms do, and I've met folks at firms throughout, New England and in New York that are doing really unique work. But I think it is something to contemplate. And we're also going to see what's going to happen at the federal level the next 4 years on environmental issues. I know quite a few people that actually went to BC that are working at some of these agencies that are really reflecting on the position that they're going to be put in the next 4 years. So there is no denying that I think the practice of reflecting on what you're doing is something that forces you to, you have to carry that throughout your life. And Antonio mentioned this, but there's no right way for anyone. There's no perfect solution. And I think what should give everyone some comfort is that we're all works in progress. We're all figuring it out as we move along. And hopefully that'll help alleviate some of the stress of needing to figure everything out now, because I know that's often how it can feel when you're at this point in your education. So.
Thank you all so much. That's definitely a very important reflection you just made there at the end there, Anxhela. I did want to open it up to the rest of our participants. If anyone has a question, we would love anyone to ask. We do have a few other questions we're more than willing to share, but definitely wanted to open that up to participants.
If you have questions, you could type them in the chat or raise your hand digitally. I'm gonna ask one. Oh, Jack, do you?
Yeah, I'll just field one. So thank you guys for speaking with us. I was just curious, you guys talk a lot about taking on a lot of like responsibility with your roles. So I was just curious, like what advice would you have for someone like starting out in like the field handling with like self-doubt, even like when you're starting out, it's kind of like a new responsibility. So yeah.
I can speak to that for sure because I had a lot of, to be frank, self-doubt in my internship at the immigration clinic. Even though I did do work in the Boston College Innocence Program as an undergraduate, like the responsibilities that I had in that role compared to the one at the immigration clinic were vastly distinct. As in the ones at the immigration clinic were a lot heftier and more challenging. And there were definitely moments where I felt like, do I know what I'm doing? Am I doing a good job? Will I be able to improve over the course of these next few months? And the number one piece of advice that I would give to someone who's maybe experiencing those thoughts is to not second guess themselves and not be afraid to make mistakes. Of course, there's different degrees of mistakes that you can make in the legal profession, some more serious than others, of course. But mistakes are inevitable. That's something that my supervisors told me in my role that I had a hard time grappling with because, when you're in your first like high stakes kind of like legal internship during law school, you don't want to make any mistakes because you want to impress your supervisors and you want to do the best that you possibly can to serve the clients that you're serving, and you don't want it to reflect poorly on you. So you sometimes like create this expectation or there's standard of perfection in your mind when that's not realistic. And coming to terms with the fact that you might make mistakes, I think is crucial when you're experiencing those moments of self-doubt, but then also knowing that those mistakes are bound to happen and they're even natural, I would say, to a certain extent. I think that as long as you have a willingness to learn from those mistakes and be open to receiving feedback from others, even if it's hard to hear, having that openness to receiving feedback is important. And I think that if exemplify that openness to feedback throughout your role, then maybe those thoughts of self-doubt can, grow less and less strong because you're realizing that you're putting your best foot forward and you're learning from your mistakes as you go, rather than just being stagnant and not being willing to, rectify the mistakes that you've made. So that's the advice that I would give.
I think building off Antonio, two things I would add. One is to remember that every person that you might be intimidated by or have imposter syndrome about also started as a new attorney once, also started as an 18-year-old undergrad once. This imposing judge who might be, holding your client's life in their hands really was once in your shoes and does have some like realistic expectation of what a new attorney or someone new to a profession is capable of doing. And then to Antonio's great point about seeking out feedback and really leaning into those opportunities, I'd strongly encourage anybody to take advantage of those really structured spaces to get practice experience before going into a field. For me, that was enormously helpful. So I was doing volunteer work when I was at BC with immigrant communities. So I still had some exposure to working with, not clients, but community members. And then when I got to law school, I did 2 different clinics and then also externships and internships to really keep my feet in the practice world and not just in the law books, because I knew what I wanted to do on the other side was working with clients. And that did really help once I did graduate and had clients that were, 100% my responsibility. I at least knew what it was like to be in a clinic where I had 50% responsibility with another student and a professor supervising me. It really takes the sting out of that if you can do those opportunities earlier on.
Does anyone else from the audience have another question? Thank you so much, Jack.
Can I ask a question? Thank you guys for I wonder if I'm got this recording the right way here. Sorry, I'll try multi-speaker here. Thank you guys for your comments here. It's so great to hear how your BC experience, impacted your work. Do you have any other guidance about like what students can do now? I mean, I think it's good to hear about your work life and what those jobs are like, and that's really so helpful. But imagine a student's a sophomore here or a junior or a senior, and they think they want to go into the law. Like, are there particular internships, programs? You've all mentioned some, but do you have any other advice about what current students should be doing to test out what the law might be and what the career might look like?
I'm happy to get started on the question. Yeah, I think for one, I would encourage students to just keep tapping into their passions as well, because law school will always be there. And I think at times we're so rigid on getting somewhere, but I think what's the beautiful thing about the legal field and law school is that they're really open to people being, taking various courses in undergrad and having a diverse viewpoint. And, some of my science classes actually, I felt like the writing skills that I got from that got me really far in my legal writing career. And it was just something that I was interested in. So I would encourage them to just, one, do things that they're passionate about. Two, the great thing about being an undergrad and even in law school is you can also do internships throughout your semesters or summers. So I think you can tap into certain organizations. We at CLF, we do take legal interns so folks that are in law school, but we'll take college interns as well. So I had a college intern over the summer, and it looks like she definitely wants to go to law school to work on these issues. And it was great to hear. I think she really enjoyed her experience. It's something I didn't do. I kind of had internships just in the environmental NGO world in general, but still decided to go to law school. And then in terms of classes, if you're interested in environmental law, BC law students do teach BC undergrads environmental law. That was a course that I took, and it was really great. I do think, at least when I was taught it, it kind of took on like a traditional environmental enforcement perspective. There's other ways to do environmental law and the things that I do, but I think it's a good overview. And then the international studies department, I mean, international law, international environmental law, I took all of those classes and absolutely loved them all. Professor Owens, I hope that you guys are still offering them, but totally encourage all the students to take those things. So.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we definitely, Professor Nakazato teaches international law, and there are others who teach international business law, and there's, like you said, environmental law policy classes that are available as well. Yeah.
Two things I definitely encourage. One, to Angela's point about pursuing what you're passionate about, is if there's volunteer opportunities, even if you don't have the time or capacity to do a regular internship or something that's like sort of a standard resume boost, it's still really helpful, or it was at least for me, to take even like piecemeal volunteer opportunities. So for me, interested in immigration law, there are regular or semi-regular citizenship clinics and drives that different nonprofits in Boston will do. At the time, for me, it was the MIRA Coalition, the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy, MIRA Coalition. They, through a citizenship initiative in Boston, would hold these big clinics where they would fill like school gym or something with volunteers. There are attorneys who review all the final applications, but anybody can do the initial preparing of a naturalization application for someone who's an immigrant to become a US citizen. And they help people do fee waivers and help with translation and any number of things. So I strongly encourage you, even if you think you can only do, one weekend here and there, whatever you're passionate about, there probably is some volunteer opportunity in the Boston area, which is so rich with nonprofits and organizations and government. So I'd strongly recommend that. And second, I would say really do your research. Part of why I didn't go to law school right out of undergrad is I was writing a thesis. I was dealing with a lot of other things in my life. I didn't have the bandwidth to really spend time getting to know the law schools and the programs I was looking at. And I also didn't have a great sense of what I wanted. But if you know that you're really interested in one area of law, look at law schools closely and make sure they actually have the clinics to match your interest, or the individual classes, or a professor with a specific type of scholarship that gets you really jazzed. Don't just do it by ranking. I feel like if I had come fresh out of undergrad, I would have gone to, the highest ranked school I could get into kind of blindly without actually checking that they were going to serve where I wanted to be in the long run. So I don't think I mentioned where I went to law school, but I went to Northeastern University School of Law, which I don't think would have been on my radar earlier when I was in undergrad, but they're a very public interest focused school that does a lot of public interest focused classes, that does a co-op program, just like their undergrad school does. And so you get a lot of practical experience working with clients. And they also put a lot of scholarship money towards public interest work, because that's sort of their bread and butter. So for me, that was a great landing spot, but I wouldn't have found it if I hadn't spent the time researching what law schools had to offer and also talking in sort of informational interviews with people who had jobs I admired and finding out the pathway they took to get there. So I talked to immigration attorneys working in places that I'd like to be someday, and I found out, where they went to law school, where they started out, what was helpful to them. People, like, it seems intimidating, but they love to talk about what they do, especially if they're passionate. That's why all of us panelists are here. So really don't be shy about even cold emailing people or putting out to your contacts that you're looking to speak to someone in a certain field. I find more often than not, people are more than happy to.
That's such great advice about the rankings. I don't know if Antonio is going to talk about that too, but I think that's so important to pay attention to the precise programs in your schools and not just do some sort of a mechanical ranking process that someone else does as a result of measuring scholarly production at that school.
Absolutely, and I support and agree with all the advice given so far. I would also say that you should take advantage of the student organizations at BC. For example, like the Bellarmine Law Society, the Ahana Pre-Law Student Association. Those organizations, in my opinion, like one of their main goals is to introduce undergraduates to attorneys working in different practices and to solicit the advice of the attorneys, whether it be through panels or events or whatever it is, to provide advice to the undergraduates. I know that I met a few attorneys as an undergraduate through those organizations, and I learned a lot through that, because I think that networking is really important. There are people who enjoy networking more than others. Sometimes it could be a little bit intimidating if you don't know the person beforehand, but I agree with the fact, well, I think that there's no harm in just reaching out. And the worst that can happen is that they either don't answer or they say that they don't have time. But if they don't have time, you can always ask them, well, is there a colleague of yours who you think may have the time to like speak to their experience working in this particular type of law? Could you provide me with their contact if that's okay? And if they do, awesome. If they don't, then LinkedIn is a great tool to look for people who have gone to BC. There's literally like filters that you can use to find people who have graduated from BC or in the legal profession, or who even went to law schools that you're interested in, and seeing and like reaching out to those people and asking them how their experience in their respective law school helped like led them to where they are in their current role. And if their current role is something that you'd see yourself doing or that you're really interested in, then maybe that law school is a great option for you, or maybe you should look into it more. So I really do think that going to these student events at BC is a great way to kind of like start networking. And I think that you can even build from that by cold emailing, like Shayna said. So I think that those are really valuable things you shouldn't take advantage of.
Yeah, quickly, I will also make a plug for LinkedIn. It's such a great way to meet with people, and it's so easy to just send a direct message and say, like, hey, I just want to get on a quick call. And BC also has I think it's called the Eagle Exchange program. There's a forum in which you can be connected with alumni, and I'm often receiving messages, and I'm always happy to talk directly one-on-one with students. So you have a lot of tools available to you in that regard.
Great, thank you so much. If there's any other student questions, we're open for that. And then otherwise we can start wrapping up. But William?
Hi. First off, thank you so much to all of you for coming to speak to us today. I guess one question I really had was, I know we've talked a lot about like your journey in the legal field. I think one concern that a lot of pre-law students have is the expectation that studying law and especially working in the legal field can be very demanding on a person. So I'm just curious, in your cases, how have you guys been able to manage the stress of this work, and like how do you take care of yourself when managing such demanding like tasks?
That's a really fair question. And I'll say when I started law school, one of the first things they did at orientation was have people from like a nonprofit about like attorney burnout and the long-term like sustainability come and speak to us, because even the law schools are aware right out the gate that this can be a real issue in a profession where you take so much responsibility for other people, and there can be so much on the line. So I think a really important thing for for me in managing the intensity of my work and the potential for burnout is really finding organizations or workplaces that have good culture and supportive practices. There's a lot of law firms that are known for being really intense, expecting long hours, expecting work on weekends, expecting billable hours beyond belief, and really doing your research ahead of time before you are applying to jobs or even while you're interviewing to find out from, maybe real employees or former employees what the deal is and whether this is a good working environment for you. Some people thrive under that kind of pressure, but really you want to try to get the information about a work culture before you get there and see if it suits you. Self-care is important and again, something that's enforced throughout law school and at a lot of places I've worked, but I think it only goes so far if you're not in a healthy environment.
Yeah, I think those are all great points, and I'd love to hear from Antonio too as to how he's doing. But yes, law school, they're not, I mean, I personally, for me, I did not really enjoy my first year. I loved my education at BC and loved the classes that I was taking. And I think the pressure of having one exam be determinant of your entire semester grade and also the scholarship money on the line was really stressful, and you had to find ways to manage it. I do think that once I got involved in the legal areas that I was more interested in, that really helped. And then I kind of was able to find places that I liked. But it's a journey. I think that is the reality of it. And every year you're learning so much and you find new ways to manage it. And I think recognizing that it will all be okay is an important part of it. If your LSAT score doesn't go well on your first time, I tell all the students that I've talked to, take it again because you will definitely do better the second time. You might get off the wait list with your second score. You might get more scholarship money with your second score, but try not to have, the mindset of like, it's all over for me if something doesn't go right or you're perfect the first time around. Um, and I think where you work is really, really important. I'm, really grateful to work with a great group of people that, are passionate, that are really respectful of work-life balance. We care about the work that we do, so, we enjoy it. But if I have to, be home or take care of other things or, have appointments, you're trusted, if your work gets done, um, you know, that's kind of where the check-in comes in from. So to me, it would be really hard to make the switch from having so much autonomy to like being micromanaged and, checking every minute of every single day. And that's really allowed me to kind of feel like, I'm not just a lawyer focusing on these issues. I'm a person with, many passions and many different interests. So you do have to consider all of that. And again, I think that comes with the public interest world compared to other types of law.
So I think that, the legal field and law school in particular is very, very difficult, and it can be, you know, physically, mentally, emotionally demanding. A couple things that I'll say. So I agree, the first year I did not really have a great time either. It was very stressful. I was navigating the transition from college to law school because it's vastly different experiences. Also, like Angela said, one exam determines your entire grade, so the pressure on, doing well in that exam is a lot, but then also that exam is usually cumulative. So it covers the material that you learn throughout the entire semester. So you have to also make sure that you're keeping up with the readings as best as you can and the material as it's taught, so you don't cram everything at the end. And that can be a challenge for sure in and of itself. One, I think that finding other people in law school who, maybe share your values or have similar life experiences or who you vibe with in general is crucial, because even if you're struggling, you're at least struggling together with your friends, and you can be in study groups or you can complain about it to each other, but you have that outlet at least, and others who, relate to your experience. I also think, and I it took a long time for me to take my own advice, but also making self-care kind of a priority, of course, within reason, I have to say, but making self-care a priority is very, very important, because if you don't, then of course, burnout is a lot easier. I found that in my first year of law school, I didn't dedicate as much time as I probably should have to, socializing with friends outside of law school and exercising and doing things that would take care of myself rather than just focusing on my grade. But I think that this semester I've really made it a priority to, socialize with friends outside of law school and then also exercise because I find that those things like make me happier in a lot of ways and also almost like make me more like mentally and emotionally prepared to take on the challenges that a legal education entails. So making those things their own priority rather than just an afterthought, I think is really important. Of course, it's hard and it takes a while to reach that for some people. It did for me. But eventually getting to that point, once you get to that point, it really does help.
Well, thank you all so much for your participation today. A huge thank you to our panelists for sharing your time and your advice. We are so grateful for your generosity in giving back to the BC community and the smaller IS community. So thank you, thank you. And to everyone who participated today, thank you for your questions. We really hope that this panel was helpful in considering your paths in the legal career. Again, this event is recorded, so it will be posted on our International Studies program YouTube channel for future viewing. And we hope to see you all at future events.
Thanks, everybody.